National Guard and Reserve veterans and their families navigate through the challenges associated with their deployment. I urge my colleagues to support my amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Members seek time in opposition. For purposes, the gentleman from Florida rise.
Mr. Chairman, I rise to support this amendment.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
The Yellow Ribbon program is really a really great program, and the gentleman has made the case very powerfully, and I'm in support of what he's trying to do, so I support the amendment. Yeah, of course I do.
The gentleman for his amendment, and we gladly support it.
I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Questions on the amendment? The gentleman from Pennsylvania. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed will say no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is adopted. The clerk will read.
Page 127, line 10, Operation and Maintenance, Navy Reserve, $55,924,000. Operation and Maintenance, Marine Corps Reserve, $25,477,000. Operation and Maintenance, Air Force Reserve, $120,618,000. Operation and Maintenance, Army National Guard, $382,448,000. Operation and Maintenance, Air National Guard, $34,500,000. Overseas Contingency Operations Transfer Fund, including transfer of funds, $3,250,000,000. Afghanistan Infrastructure Fund, including transfer of funds, $375 million to remain available until September 30th, 2014.
The clerk will suspend. For purpose, the gentleman from Rhode Island seek recognition.
Mr. Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Cicilline of Rhode Island. Page 130, line 14, after the dollar amount, insert reduced by $375 million. Page 153, line 15, after the dollar amount, insert increased by $375 million.
Gentleman from Rhode Island is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise today in opposition to the continued appropriation of hundreds of millions of dollars to the Afghanistan Infrastructure Fund while our national infrastructure is crumbling right here in America. President Obama has laid out a broad vision for completing our work in Afghanistan, turning security responsibilities over to the Afghan people and bringing our troops home. Now is the time to focus our resources here in the United States on our own roads, bridges, schools, and infrastructure. We have already spent billions of dollars toward rebuilding the infrastructure of Afghanistan. But as we begin drawing down combat operations in Afghanistan, it's the responsibility of the Afghan people to build, operate, and maintain their own civilian and military institutions and their own infrastructure. My amendment, which I offer along with Congressman Honda, the gentlelady from California, Ms. Sanchez, and the gentleman from Vermont, Mr. Welch, would strike the funding for the Afghanistan Infrastructure Fund and apply the savings to the spending reduction account. Established by Congress in the fiscal year 2011 National Defense Authorization, in its first year, the Afghanistan Infrastructure Fund received an appropriation of $400 million. These funds have been dedicated to projects that are jointly approved by the Department of State and the Department of Defense, and the projects include power generation and transmission, roads, and construction of other large infrastructure projects. According to the April 2012 report by the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, from fiscal year 2002 through the end of March in fiscal year 2012, the United States appropriated approximately $89.4 billion for relief and reconstruction in Afghanistan. Approximately $800 million has been provided thus far for the Afghanistan Infrastructure Fund. As the Nonpartisan Congressional Research Service indicates, from 2012 to 2010, the U.S. Agency for International Development allocated more than $2 billion towards road construction and more than $1.2 billion towards electric power in Afghanistan. And while we spend billions of dollars on infrastructure in Afghanistan, we've also seen reports from the Government Accountability Office and others that have highlighted the challenges in accounting for how reconstruction funds are spent and the overall impact that these are having on the society there. And yet, according to a 2011 report by the American Society of Civil Engineers, the cost of our crumbling infrastructure right here in America is real. By the year 2020, our nation's crumbling surface transportation infrastructure is slated to cost the United States economy more than 876,000 jobs and suppress the growth of the country's gross domestic product by $897 billion by 2020. These costs are only going to increase more and more if we don't take action to make the much-needed and long-deferred investments in our own transportation systems and our own infrastructure. When we look at the bigger picture, including water and wastewater, energy, schools, ports, and more, the American Society of Civil Engineers estimated that over the next 5 years, we would need an investment of $2.2 trillion just to bring our nation's infrastructure to a condition they describe as good. Every year that we wait to take meaningful steps to do this, the cost to taxpayers and to our economy keeps growing and growing and growing. Over the past 18 months, constituents have expressed to me tremendous frustration that we're devoting so many of our resources, so much of our energy to rebuilding the infrastructure in Afghanistan. They ask, why are we dedicating so much to nation building halfway around the world when there are so many families right here in our own country who are struggling to find work and make ends meet? We need to do nation building right here at home in America. This amendment is a strong step in support of reinvesting in our own economy, our own infrastructure right here at home. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, this gets to be a very serious issue if we want to get our troops out of Afghanistan. At numerous hearings with General Allen, who commands in Afghanistan, General Mattis, commander of Central Command, this was their recommendation. This is what they said they needed in order to get us and get our troops out of Afghanistan, which I think we all want to see happen as quickly as possible. Certainly, I can tell you that I do. We did not fund it totally because some of the plans were not sufficiently considered. But generally, this is what our commanders in the field, those responsible for fighting the fight, those responsible for leading our troops, this is what they tell us they need to get our troops out of Afghanistan. And so I do object to and oppose this amendment. I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. Is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Rhode Island. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
As for the yeas and nays, Mr. Chairman, recorded vote.
Request for recorded vote. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Rhode Island will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Cohen of Tennessee, page 130, line 14. After the dollar amount, insert reduced by $175 million. Page 153, line 15. After the dollar amount, insert increase by $175 million.
Gentleman from Tennessee is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, sir. I'm not going to repeat some of the arguments that were made by my colleague from Rhode Island, but I understand them. There's indeed a large need for infrastructure in our country. We're falling far behind. And we've invested a lot of money in Afghanistan that has been wasted. A tremendous amount of money has been wasted. The most recent report I saw said that we cannot even begin to approximate how much money has been stolen and wasted in Afghanistan. We're not providing infrastructure for the people. We're providing a ruling class, a limited, we talk about the 2% here, we're talking about the 1/10 of 1% in Afghanistan, if that, and giving them the opportunity to put money in their pocket that should be going to the people. But I asked the gentleman on the other side of the aisle who opposed the last amendment to consider this one, which almost passed last year, same basic amendment. This takes $175 million out, leaves $200 million in the fund, but it says they've got to prioritize, pick their projects. and pick what they do. It doesn't decimate the fund, it just prioritizes and takes $175 million out of the Afghan Infrastructure Fund. We rebuilt Iraq. They're partners with Iran now. Didn't do us a lot of good. Most of us have been to Afghanistan, or at least, better yet, many of us have. We could do all the infrastructure in the world. It'll go to waste. They can't even maintain it. They don't have vehicles to use the roads. It's crazy to build them roads to go from point A to point B when they don't have cars. They've got oxes and carts. So I would say that we reduce it by $175 million. We leave $200 million. Certainly I want our troops out. I went and visited with 124 soldiers, guardsmen in Memphis, who are going down to Camp Shelby before they go to Afghanistan. Visited with them yesterday morning when they went off, all police people. I suspect one of those people may not come back. I hated the idea that those people were leaving Memphis to go to Afghanistan. It'd be the last troops going over. I want them out. And if Mr. Young understands, I guess, there's some magic to this money. There'll be $200 million left. If it's roads to get them out and airports to get them out, fine. But I can't believe they need all 375, and I have to submit that I think that a lot of that money is for roads and infrastructure, hospitals, grids, whatever, that has nothing to do with our troops getting out. It has something to do with some people who continue a policy that has failed to really build up goodwill toward America or to see that the monies go where they belong. So I ask that we think of America first. We get our troops out. We leave $200 million in the fund. I ask you to approve this amendment and reduce the Afghanistan Infrastructure Fund by $175 million. I urge my colleagues to support the amendment, and I thank the Speaker for the time and yield back the balance thereof.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida rise?
Mr. Chairman, I rise to oppose the amendment.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
And I would say to the sponsor of the amendment that this is a more reasonable approach. Yes, it is. But this actually cuts the fund in half. Now, that is a major cut on something that our military commanders in the field say that they really need to have. Now, the committee took a $25 million cut, but that was in agreement with the commanders. They felt that they could absorb that cut and still do the program. But I don't think I can support cutting this program in half.
Would the gentleman yield?
Yes, of course.
Well, I didn't know in your statement to the gentleman from Rhode Island, why are these funds needed to get our troops out? Do we not have airplanes and roads and boats and whatever to get our folks out?
We were having a little trouble hearing at the table here. Can you?
I say, in response to the gentleman from Rhode Island, you said these funds, all $375 million, were needed to get our troops out of Afghanistan. Why do we need? Are we building like runways to get all our troops out? Roads to get them out?
Let me respond. Reclaim my time. I want the troops out of Afghanistan as soon as our military commanders advise us and the President that we can do so and we can do it safely. I have seen on my weekly visits to the Walter Reed Bethesda Hospital, I have seen the terrible, terrible, tragic cost of this war. And that doesn't even talk about those who have lost their lives. So I don't want to walk through that hospital and see any more quadruple or triple amputees. I don't want to see that. And I want our military commanders must make that decision. We are not in a position to make that decision of how, when, where do we accomplish this departure from Afghanistan with victory. And so I still have to express my objection to this amendment, because it cuts the fund that our military commanders tell us that they need. It cuts it in half. And so I just have to oppose the amendment. And I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Tennessee. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
I request the ayes and the nays on the roll call version of voting in the traditional way where we show our colors on the board.
When request a recorded vote pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Tennessee will be postponed. For what purpose the gentleman from California rise?
Rise to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of an amendment that was offered by Congressman Poe, which I understand may well be reintroduced once the wording is worked on a little bit by the end of this discussion. Let me just then move forward with my support for Judge Poe's amendment, the basic concept that he has presented, which is to eliminate funding for Pakistan. And basically, we need to end the charade once and for all that we are buying Pakistani cooperation against terrorist forces in South Asia. Pakistan isn't with us in the war against terrorism. They are at war with us by supporting and funding the very terrorists that we are up against. Pakistan, at best, is a war profiteer collecting ransom by taxing our military supply lines that pass through their country. They are laughing all the way to the bank. They are also laughing as their military intelligence, the ISI, takes huge sums of money that they are getting from us and then passing it on to terrorists and radical Islamicists who are killing their neighbors and killing American military personnel. After our SEALs went to get Osama bin Laden, the Pakistani military took the wreckage of our downed stealth helicopter and gave it for study to the communist Chinese. Then they arrested and imprisoned the Pakistani doctor who risked his life to help us find bin Laden. Dr. Afridi still languishes in a Pakistani dungeon even as we speak here today. Some of us understand that this Pakistani doctor, and I hope we all should understand this, that this Pakistani doctor is an American hero. He risked his life to bring justice to the murderers of 3,000 Americans who died on 9/11. It is a shame that we even consider giving Pakistan aid, billions of dollars of aid, while they keep Dr. Afridi in a dungeon. Who else will ever cooperate with us in the future? Who's going to work with our military overseas, knowing that that's the way we treat people who've committed heroic acts? We shouldn't give the Pakistanis one penny till Dr. Afridi is freed. Just recently, I was contacted by a distraught individual in Pakistan asking for help in locating a missing Baluch leader. Sadly, this Baluch leader is probably already dead, another victim of the Pakistani government's kill and dump policy in which they repress their own people. Well, we have to understand we have lost over 2,000 American military personnel in Afghanistan, but who has been supporting the side that has been killing our people? The Pakistanis have inspired and supported these very insurgents. They were the creators of the Taliban, and after 9/11, they have played us for fools ever since. Yesterday, this House passed a bill that Pakistani's Haqqani network should be listed as a terrorist organization. That terrorist organization has been helped and supplied by some members of the Pakistani military. We should have quit bankrolling this rotten regime a long time ago. We should end the charade. There are people in Southeast Asia, or South Asia, I should say, that are our friends. Due to the Cold War, we allied ourselves with Pakistan a long time ago, and we were told they were the bulwark against radical Islam. That was a lie. But during the Cold War, we needed them in the fight against the Soviet Union. The Cold War is over. We should ally ourselves with people who share our values and cherish, as we cherish them, a friendship between free people. As I say, we should go towards India, now that the Cold War is over, to help establish a new type of relationship in South Asia that will preserve the peace and preserve the equilibrium in that part of the world. It is ridiculous for us to continue to support that country, that government, that is the basis of support for the most radical elements of radical Islam and the terrorist units that are killing our people and killing their people throughout the world. If we're having trouble getting out of Afghanistan, it's because the Pakistanis are on the wrong side, and we all know it. We shouldn't give one more penny thinking we're going to buy their friendship. They disdain us for it. They think we're weaklings for it. Let's stand up for Dr. Afridi. Let's stand up and make sure that we are courageous in what we're doing in our policy and not trying to curry favor with gangsters that run a country like Pakistan.
Time has expired. The clerk will read.
Page 132, line 21, Afghanistan Security Forces Fund, $5,026,500,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2014.
The clerk will suspend. For what purpose the gentleman from Iowa rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Boswell of Iowa, page 132, line 23, after the dollar amount, insert reduced by $22 million. Page 141, line 12, after the dollar amount, insert increased by $10 million.
Gentleman from Iowa is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise to offer an amendment with my good friend from Washington, Mr. McDermott, to provide greater funding for suicide prevention outreach for our troops on active duty. This amendment would add $10 million for suicide prevention outreach to the Defense Health Program of the Operations and Maintenance account in Title IX of the bill. It would pay for this by transferring $22 million from the Afghanistan Security Forces Fund. This amendment is fully paid for, fiscally responsible, and incredibly timely. This is the most recent issue of Time magazine, reporting that military and veteran suicide is a tragic epidemic that has only gotten worse. We are currently losing one U.S. soldier every day to suicide, and I know my colleague Dr. McDermott comes to this issue as an expert in the field. I come as a Vietnam veteran and someone very passionate about providing our heroes with the care and the support they deserve. In 2007, I wrote the Joshua Omvig Veteran Suicide Prevention Act to honor the memory of a young veteran from Iowa who tragically took his life in front of his mother. To make sure the veterans have 24/7 access to crisis hotline and other mental health resources, we passed that bill. And since then, the Veterans Crisis Hotline has answered more than 600,000 calls and reportedly made more than 21,000 life-saving rescues. Tragically, we still lose a veteran to suicide every 80 minutes, so we have much more to do. And I want to thank the chairman. I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the ranking member for their work on this issue. You work tirelessly to combat suicide rates amongst our service members and our veterans. And I hope you will join me in supporting this amendment. We are losing too many of our heroes. It's up to us to act. So with that, I'll yield the remainder of the time to the gentleman from Washington, Mr. McDermott.
Thank you, Mr. Boswell. Mr. Boswell and I saw the Vietnam War in different ways. He by flying a helicopter and me by being a psychiatrist dealing with people who came home. And I feel strongly that suicide prevention and the intervention that must become, in military speak, a core mission of the military. This week's Time magazine, as you see from that article, or from that front page, describes military suicides as an epidemic. I would like to take $10 million out of a $19 billion fund in this amendment to go beyond the funding for existing suicide prevention services and toward modifying the culture that keeps some from seeking help. We must also note that any progress in suicide prevention will be fleeting if we don't focus on reducing the stigma associated with seeking psychological health services among our active duty people. I believe the Pentagon can do more to eradicate the barriers to mental health care. That means ensuring that mental health and substance abuse issues are treated as medical issues and are taken out of the realm of personnel matters. This means ensuring that seeking and receiving psychological health care does nothing to jeopardize a soldier's security clearance or prospects in his future career. I would also urge the Pentagon to ensure that a portion of this money goes toward hiring and developing and retention of top-tier psychological mental health for our military at this time. It is the tail of cost of this war that nobody calculates when we go to war. What do we do when the people come home? We forget them. We think they should pull themselves together and go back to their regular life, and many of them can't do it without some help. We need to provide it. They become desperate, figure there's no hope, and take their own life. That shouldn't happen to a 24-year-old kid, man or woman, who's been in Afghanistan or Iraq, giving to our country what we ask from them. Their willingness to risk the whole business of going to war has to be dealt with when they come home. I yield back the balance of my time to Mr. Boswell.
We yield back and ask for everyone's support. Thank you.
The gentleman from Iowa yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida rise?
Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of this amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I had opposed similar amendments in the past because of the source of the funding, the defense-wide O&M accounts, which we just really cannot afford to cut into our readiness accounts. This does not take funding from that account. So I appreciate the gentleman's changing the source of his amendment, and I'm agreeing to the amendment. Yes, of course.
I just want to thank you again for your attention and your dedication to this cause, Mr. Chairman. I've noticed that for years. You and the ranking member have worked together, and you're doing the right thing. Thank you very much on the behalf of...
I thank the gentleman for his comments, and
the chairman yields.
I yield to my friend, Mr.
I want to commend the gentleman for his efforts here, and my colleague from Washington State, who I know has a biting concern about this, as I do. This is a tragedy when more people are dying from suicide than are in combat. And it's something, you know, I know the Army has tried, General Corelli made an enormous effort to try to find the answers, and it's a serious, difficult problem, and a lot of it relies on trying to deal with these people before they go over, so that you can find the ones that are going to be susceptible or have problems going in. And it's just a very difficult problem. But I commend the gentleman for his leadership on this.
Thank you.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yields back. Question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Iowa. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is adopted. The clerk will read.
Page 134, line 7, procurement, aircraft procurement, Army, $541,600,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2015. Missile procurement, Army, $49,653,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2015. Procurement of weapons and tracked combat vehicles, Army, $15,422,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2015. Procurement of ammunition, Army, $338,493,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2015. Other procurement, Army, $2,005,907,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2015. Aircraft procurement, Navy, $146,277,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2015. Weapons procurement, Navy, $22,500,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2015. Procurement of ammunition, Navy and Marine Corps, $284,450,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2015. Other procurement, Navy, $98,882,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2015. Procurement, Marine Corps, $943,683,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2015. Aircraft procurement, Air Force, $305,600,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2015. Missile procurement, Air Force, $34,350,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2015. Procurement of ammunition, Air Force, $116,203,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2015. Other procurement, Air Force, $2,785,170,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2015. Procurement defense-wide, $217,849,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2015. Research, Development, Test, and Evaluation, Research, Development, Test, and Evaluation Army, $14,860,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2014. Research, Development, Test, and Evaluation Navy, $60,119,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2014. Research, Development, Test, and Evaluation Air Force, $53,150,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2014. Research, Development, Test, and Evaluation Defense-wide, $107,387,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2014. Revolving and Management Funds, Defense Working Capital Funds, $293,600,000. Other Department of Defense programs, Defense Health Program, $993,898,000, which shall be for operation and maintenance to remain available until September 30th, 2014. Drug Interdiction and Counter-Drug Activities Defense, $469,025,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2014. Joint Improvised Explosive Device Defeat Fund, $1,614,900,000.
What purposes? The gentlelady from California rise.
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm here to offer an amendment to strike $120.5 million in undistributed funds from the Joint Improvised Explosive Device Defeat Fund.
I have an amendment at the desk.
I have an amendment at the desk, excuse me.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Ms. Spear, California. Page 142, line 6. After the dollar amount, insert reduced by $120,500,000. Page 153, line 15. After the dollar amount, insert increased by $120,500,000.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm here to offer an amendment to strike $120.5 million in undistributed funds from the Joint Improvised Explosive Device Defeat Fund, matching the Senate authorizers and keeping intact over $1.7 billion for this program. The Joint Improvised Explosive Device Defeat Fund, more commonly known as JIDO, is responsible for leading, advocating, and coordinating the Defense Department's efforts to defeat IEDs. And more than $20 billion, Congress has received numerous reports that JIDO has had decidedly mixed outcomes. And after 3 attempts, still has not developed a mechanism for tracking the Pentagon's counter-IED efforts. So we've spent $20 billion. In the Senate, the Armed Services Committee cut $200 million from JIDO. In their report, they said JIDO suffered from, quote, duplication of effort with the military services, excessive contractor support costs, and organizational inefficiencies, unquote. As the Washington Post recently reported, these excessive contractor support costs included non-competitive contracts given to former government employees, profiting from Washington's perpetual revolving door, and hundreds of millions of dollars in contracts being subcontracted out to other former military personnel. Isn't this what our constituents dislike the most about what's going on here? That there are cronyism activities, that there are revolving doors, that military personnel after they're retired become mentors? This bill also recognizes there's a problem here. The bill itself has actually reduced their budget by $60 million. The IED threat remains significant, but continuing to robustly invest in counter-IED technology makes less sense, both tactically and strategically. From a tactical level, Pentagon statistics show that IEDs were 25% less effective this year than the year before. Strategically, we are shifting away from ground wars and counterinsurgency missions and must begin reallocating some of these funds to more pressing national security needs. In February, the GAO told Congress that JIDO's poor planning and management resulted in many funds going to duplicative projects, creating waste and likely slowing down the ability of the Department of Defense to meet its mission objectives. For example, in 2008, the U.S. Central Command began development for a directed energy solution to defeating IEDs. Without coordination, JIDO undertook I repeat that, 6 different efforts to tackle the problem, which cost taxpayers at least $104 million. When the commander of the U.S. Central Command still didn't have a solution by August 2011, he had to write JIDO to urge them to coordinate their efforts in hopes of getting something he could feel to fulfill what was then a 3-year-old unmet requirement for the warfighter. JIDO coordinated the effort of these 6 projects, but deferred making a decision on shifting resources or canceling the project yet again. The organization also admitted that they likely would not have been able to execute their mission to manage the Pentagon's IED efforts in this case without the commander's written protests. Some soldiers in the field have also expressed disappointment at JIDO's results. A Marine that served in Afghanistan in 2009 compared the IED detecting device issued by JIDO to a beachcomber's faulty metal detector and said his IED jammers were frequently broken. Others report that dogs remain more reliable detectors downrange. It's time to stop signing a blank check for an organization that cannot track its projects or expenditures, that often gives contracts to its cronies, and that the GAO has said is duplicative. As we draw down in Afghanistan and look to cut funds from much more productive and efficient parts of the federal budget, I urge you to support these cuts of an inefficient organization that lacks the management controls to prevent taxpayer dollars from being wasted, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. For what purpose the gentleman from New Jersey rise?
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, the Joint IED Defeat Fund, we recognize the fact we're still a nation at war. The young men and women who come back from war, and God forbid some come back having paid the ultimate sacrifice, but many come back with an unbelievable wounds, double amputees, loss of different limbs. This Joint IED Task Force has done a lot to minimize that possibility. The committee did recognize, and as the gentlewoman mentions, we did reduce spending in this fund by $70 million, but we're a nation at war. They still have a critical mission, and it's important that the work that they continue to do to defeat sometimes the simplest IEDs and sometimes the most complex IEDs continue. It's an investment that we need to make sure that as we finish our job in Afghanistan, that we do our level best to protect our troops, those that are volunteering there, and to bring them back home in one piece. So we oppose the gentlewoman's amendment. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Question is on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from California. All those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed will say no.
No.
The opinion of the chair, the noes have it. It is not adopted. The clerk will read.
Page 143, line 6. Office of the Inspector General, $10,766,000. General Provisions, this title, Section 9001. Funds made available in this title are in addition to amounts appropriated for the Department of Defense for fiscal year 2013. Section 9002, including transfer of funds. Upon the determination of the Secretary that such action is necessary in the national interest, the Secretary may, with the approval of the Office of Management and Budget, transfer up to $3 billion between the appropriations or funds made available to the Department. Section 9003, supervision and administration costs associated with a construction project provided in this Act may be obligated at the time a construction contract is awarded. Section 9004, from funds made available, the Secretary may purchase passenger motor vehicles up to a limit of $75,000 per vehicle. Section 9005, not to exceed $250 million, may be used to fund the Commander's Emergency Response Program for the purpose of enabling military commanders in Afghanistan to respond to urgent, small-scale humanitarian relief and reconstruction requirements within their areas of responsibility. Section 9006, funds available to the Department for Operation and Maintenance may be used to provide supplies and other logistical support to coalition forces supporting military operations in Afghanistan. Section 9007, none of the funds shall be obligated or expended by the United States government for a purpose as follows: to establish any military installation or base for the purpose of providing for the permanent stationing of United States Armed Forces in Iraq. Section 9008, none of the funds may be used in contravention of the following laws enacted to implement the United Nations Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment, Section 2340A of Title 18, United States Code. Section 9009, none of the funds may be obligated prior to the approval of a financial and activity plan by the Afghanistan Resources Oversight Council of the Department. Section 9010, funds made available for operation and maintenance may be used to purchase items having an investment unit cost of not more than $250,000. Section 9011, $88 million under the heading Operation and Maintenance, Army, may be obligated for the purposes of the Task Force for Business and Stability Operations. Section 9012, under the heading Operation and Maintenance, Air Force, up to $508 million. Section 9013, availability of funds. Each amount designated by the Congress for overseas contingency operations, global war on terrorism, shall be available only if the President designates all such amounts. Section 9014, rescissions. Of the funds appropriated in the Department of Defense Appropriations Acts, funds are rescinded. Section 9015, none of the funds under the heading Operation and Maintenance defense-wide may be made available unless the Secretary certifies to the committees that the government of Pakistan is cooperating with the United States in counterterrorism efforts. Title 10, additional general provisions, spending reduction account. Section 10001, the amount by which the applicable allocation of new budget authority made by the Committee on Appropriations is $0.
Mr. Chairman,
For what purpose, the gentleman from New Jersey rise?
I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5
Mr.
minutes.
Chairman, from the clerk's reading, we've reached the limitations portion of the bill, and we would encourage members have amendments for us to consider in that arena or portion. This would be the appropriate time for them to come forward. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Pennsylvania rise.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to enter into a colloquy with the chairman.
Gentleman move to strike the last word.
I wish to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes. I thank the Speaker. Mr. Chairman, I rise today to share the concern of 7 members of this House that represent Army depots and arsenals, including Letterkenny Army Depot in my congressional district in Pennsylvania. I ask for unanimous consent to submit the following letter for the record that fully addresses our concerns. The gentleman's request will be covered by general leave. I thank the Speaker. This bill includes reductions in funding for depots and arsenals due to a perceived surplus of funded workload available for previous fiscal years. After further analysis and additional feedback provided by the Army, we believe these cuts, as currently structured, could have a lasting negative impact on the organic industrial base. It is my understanding that the House Appropriations Committee agrees that these current general provisions should be modified and is already developing an alternative plan. As a member of the House Armed Services Committee, I look forward to working with the Chairman to address these concerns and to ensure we provide adequate funding for depots and arsenals. I know we are both in favor of strong and capable organic industrial base and the critical role our depots and arsenals play in maintaining the readiness of our military. Mr. Chairman, at this time I would like to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Loebsack. I yield my time to the gentleman from Iowa. Gentleman?
Okay. Thank you. I thank the gentleman from Pennsylvania. Our depots, arsenals, and their workforce are critical to our national security and ability to rapidly equip our soldiers. For example, in 2003, the Rock Island Arsenal produced 500 Humvee add-on armor kits to protect our troops within 3 months of receiving the order. We must strengthen our arsenals and depots so that they are able to continue to produce the equipment that is vitally needed by our men and women in uniform. I am strongly concerned that the effects of the bill's reductions will be felt beyond 2013 and across the organic industrial base, and I appreciate the Chairman's willingness to work with us. I look forward to closely collaborating with him in support of our arsenals and depots, and I appreciate this time, and I yield back. Thank you.
Yields back. Gentleman from Pennsylvania. I thank the gentleman from Iowa and the gentleman from Texas who's not here on the floor. I'd like to talk a little bit about his situation down at the Corpus Christi Army Depot, which is an industry leader of repair and overhaul for our aviation helicopters, employing over 6,000 civilians, of which 56% are veterans. Without CCAD, the Army would be unable to sustain maximum combat power for the warfighter. Further, the depot in Corpus Christi stewardship of taxpayer dollars is evident in the cost-effective repair and overhaul of rotary wing aircraft systems. For example, in fiscal 2011, a record production year, more than $47 million in cost savings was documented at the CCAD. With today's rotary wing aircraft, unmanned aircraft systems flying in record numbers, the work at Corpus Christi Army Depot has become invaluable to the aircraft to remain airworthy. I'm concerned that any lapse in production of the UH-60 Black Hawk recap at CCAD's largest single program would have a negative impact on supporting component programs and major OEM contracts and employers. I know that the gentleman from Texas looks forward to working with the Chairman, as do I, and other members of the House that represent depots and arsenals and the House Appropriations Committee as this bill moves forward to conference. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time. Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey rise?
Mr. Chairman, move to strike the last word and continue the colloquy with the gentleman from Pennsylvania. I thank the gentlemen, yes, thank you, for their comments, and we share in their support of a strong organic industrial base and a strong, ready military. We are pleased to work closely with members of the Army Depot and Arsenal delegation throughout the conference proceedings to ensure their concerns are fully addressed and the necessary adjustments to depot and arsenal funding are made. And I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back.
I thank the distinguished gentleman from New Jersey.
Purposes, gentleman lady from California rise.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Will the gentlelady specify which amendments she seeks to offer?
My amendment is Woolsey 041.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Ms. Woolsey of California. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. The total amount of appropriations made available by this act is hereby reduced by $181 million.
The gentlelady from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, our nation's transportation infrastructure is in terrible, terrible disrepair. More than ever, we need to be pumping resources into transportation projects and into initiatives for that end. We need to upgrade and modernize our roads and highways, but we also need to build up mass transit systems, buses, rail lines, etc. Doing so improves lives in our communities, allowing people to move around more freely and easily. And it also creates jobs. And by reducing our dependency on automobile travel, this transportation is clean energy, efficient, and environmentally sensitive as well. Luckily, we have a federal agency, the Federal Transit Administration, or FTA, that exists to make exactly these investments. I'm proud to say that my home district has benefited from FTA grants to the tune of $11 million over the last year. A new commuter train, the Sonoma-Marin Rail Transit, or SMART train, that connects the major cities in my district is just one of the local projects that is putting FTA money to good use. So, at a moment when our transportation needs are so great across the country, wouldn't it make sense to increase the FTA budget? Except that the House, expressing the priorities of its Republican majority, recently passed a fiscal year 2013 appropriations bill that cut $181 million from current FTA spending levels. And at the same time, they're now presenting us with a Department of Defense spending bill that calls for $1.1 billion more in military spending over current levels. Why are we all being asked to tighten our belts while the military-industrial complex gets to loosen theirs by a few notches year after year after year? If the federal budget crisis is so dire, Mr. Chairman, so dire that we can pinch pennies on badly needed transit infrastructure, surely we can do the same with a bloated Pentagon budget that has been growing out of control for more than a decade now. And that's the simple concept behind my amendment. In the interest of fairness and shared sacrifice, I'm proposing a $181 million cut to the defense appropriations bill, identical to the reduction in FTA spending passed by the House a few weeks ago. I trust that all my Republican colleagues, each one more fiscally responsible than the next, will jump at this chance to further cut federal spending. With that, I yield back my time.
The gentlelady yields back. For what purposes, the gentleman from New Jersey rise?
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to the gentlewoman's amendment. I'm the first to admit that defense should not be immune to reasonable, analytically based reductions, which are what we've already done over the past few years. Just 2 years ago, when Congress considered the fiscal year 2011 defense budget, the Department was planning on a fiscal year 2013 budget of roughly $562 billion. Their actual request for 2013, however, was only $516 billion, $46 billion less. In fact, the past 2 fiscal years, our committee has produced defense budget which totaled $39 billion below the requests. My point is that we have cut defense, but we've done so reasonably, without impacting readiness or threatening the Department's ability to protect our nation and our allies. This fiscal year 2013 budget is the first we've seen where there are identifiable and significant risks associated with the budget decisions we've made. And we've talked about that a lot today. Our pivot towards the Asia-Pacific,
the growing capability of China, things on the North Korean peninsula. For example, cutting ships and reducing the required Navy ship fleet size, retiring large numbers of aircraft, some of which have been delivered in significantly underfunding facility maintenance and modernization. We've tried to mitigate these as best we could within our given allocation. Speaking of our allocation, it's essentially in line with both the Ryan budget as well as the Defense Authorization Bill, both of which passed the House. Finally, CBO, just their most recent analysis of the Department's future years defense program, they did their analysis and determined the Department's plans will cost $123 billion more than they project over the next 5 years. National security, of course, should never be subject to partisan politics. Instead, we should show our support to our brave men and women who've sacrificed so much and who continue to do so on our behalf. And I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from California. All those in favor will say aye. All those opposed will say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not adopted. Gentlelady from California.
Mr. Chairman, with that, I would request a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from California will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Markey of Massachusetts. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following.
Mr. Chairman.
Section. None of the funds made available by this Act may be used to operate or maintain more than 300 land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles.
Would like a copy of the bill or amendment, please?
Yes, sure. Do you have a copy? Can you run it over to me?
Reserve a point of order until we have a chance to look it over.
The gentleman reserves a point of order. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank you. Our current nuclear arsenal has significant overkill that is built into it. Our country continues to spend more and more taxpayer money on nuclear weapons. And even though the President and the Senate have already agreed to reduce the number of deployed nuclear weapons, even though there is a growing bipartisan consensus that the United States has an excessive number of nuclear weapons and that the United States spends far more than it needs for a nuclear deterrent and defense. And that is why I rise today to offer my amendment to reduce the number of deployed intercontinental ballistic nuclear missiles from 450 to 300. I believe that this is the soundest approach to both our national security and our economic security needs. Each of our land-based nuclear missiles costs us, and this is an incredible number, but each nuclear missile costs us $2.4 million every year to operate and to maintain. My amendment would save the taxpayers about $360 million next year and every year after that. And it's not just arms control groups who support this departure from Cold War thinking. It also includes General James Cartwright, who until last year was the commander of the United States nuclear forces. General Cartwright published a report in May that concludes that 0 intercontinental ballistic missiles are necessary for our nuclear deterrent or defense. The former commander of U.S. nuclear forces doesn't think we need ICBMs at all. So reducing the number from 450 to 300 still leaves more than enough missiles for an effective nuclear deterrent. That's still more than enough missiles to annihilate any of our enemies over and over, to not only turn our enemies into rubble, but to make that rubble bounce and bounce and bounce again. That's how many nuclear weapons we would still have in reserve. That is a real savings, and that savings can be used for the NIH budget. The entire budget to find the cure for Alzheimer's, 5 million Americans have it. is $450 million a year. We just cut out these ICBMs and leave plenty of left over. That gives us enough money to almost double the budget to find the cure for something that really is going to kill Americans, that really does terrify them in their homes. So I pray that the House would accept this amendment. It sends us in the correct direction that we should be heading in terms of really protecting the American public. I yield to the gentleman from Washington State.
I want to compliment the gentleman on listening to what we discussed in the last go-around and then taking a hard look at land-based ICBMs, which I believe have always been the most vulnerable part of the triad. And, you know, the most invulnerable part is, of course, our ballistic missile submarines. Bombers are second, and but the land-based ICBMs are vulnerable. There's no question about that. And I do believe we can bring down the amount of money we're spending on strategic forces, and I think the focus should be, as General Cartwright has suggested, in reducing the ICBM. So this is a way to start this debate. I am going to support the gentleman's amendment today.
I thank the gentleman. I might want to, you know, just note here that the gentleman from Washington State did pioneering work in the 1980s in identifying the vulnerability of the land-based